Hello again, Dr. Jerome here. Today let's talk about uh, well, how organizations are structured. That's what this chapter is really about, this chapter 3 and chapter 4. And I'm going to tiptoe into chapter 4 a little bit at the end of this uh, presentation here, because I want you to write essay number 2 this week, and it will involve some material from chapter 4. Okay, so let's dive into this. How are organizations structured? Our perspectives. I think the chapter is 3 early perspectives on organizations. You know, I'd cut the word early out of there. These perspectives, these structural models for organizations are still out there in one form or another, combined together. Overall, as we look at these 4 different perspectives on organizations, what I see happening over the past 150 years since the Industrial Revolution would be an evolution of organizational structure, trying to find more efficiency, more profit, at various times putting emphasis in different areas to improve things. But I think this is definitely an evolution. Yet as these structures we're talking about have evolved from one to the next, to the next, to the next, they've never quite given up the old or aspects of the old. They simply change, and maybe they layer on different aspects. This isn't true with every company, but with many organizations, you get a layering of these different approaches, these different perspectives within their structure. Okay, first, let's talk about theory a little bit, and this is from the textbook. Why do we study theory here? Well, I hope that's pretty obvious to you, and you can think of it in terms of theory as truth. And what I like to say, theory is the best truth we have to work with today. Problem is, we've got decisions to make, actions to take. Things are moving forward, and we need truth. Let's call it major premises of our arguments that lead us to be persuaded to do one thing or another. Some truth like people are human beings and not machines. There's a statement of truth, and that may be actually based in a psychological theory of some sort that shows that we're not just genetic, mechanical, electrochemical machines with everything predictable about us, but there's this weird thing called emotions, there's creativity, there's all of these other aspects that we bring into this theory that comes to a conclusion. So there's our major premise, that truth, people are not just machines, they are human. We add to it a minor premise, something like the data shows that people that are happy work harder. Put those two together and it leads you to a decision, to an action. And so that's why we do look at theories. The book points out that theories are partial. They're just a piece of the puzzle. We have all of this knowledge, and in the 1680s, I believe, the Royal Society of London started to catalog all knowledge, this Enlightenment approach to what do we know about truth? What is truth? Because they were rejecting the religious worldview at that time that had led to over 100 straight years of war throughout Europe, which wasn't religious war so much as power struggles, each one using religion to justify and motivate people to fight. But they thought really the Enlightenment, truth, we're going to find knowledge, and we've got to have a library that has a compendium of all knowledge we discover now and forever in the future. Well, that Royal Society project has grown into the library system we have today, where you can look up about anything that is theoretical in nature, theories that people put out there, and as time passes, you do recognize that over 90% of all theories ever, even scientific ones, have been overturned for better theories. We work with pieces of puzzles, and we work, they're partial, and we're not even sure, we can't be sure 100% that any one theory we have is absolute truth. So theories are partial. Theories are also partisan, and I just inserted the word political here. There are people that promote one theory or another, and my favorite story about this is the theory of continental drift. I was 5 years old, and I recognize that, look, South America fits right in there into Africa. And then you start looking at these maps that have, the ocean floor below it, and you see that ridge of mountains between them that runs right down the middle, and it doesn't take much creativity for a 5-year-old to see, wow, I think they slid apart. Well, that theory was brought forth first in the 1920s, seriously, in the geological world by a young professor, and to get it published, here's where the partisan in politics comes in. He had to persuade his senior level peers, full professors, that this theory is worth publishing and debating about. Well, they were committed to other theories, their own theories, and they actually squelched that theory for a good 40, 50 years. It appeared in my 1977 geology textbook when I first started college as 1/2 of a page. Continental drift theory, plate tectonics, 1 page? Is that all we would give it in 1977? Now you can take an entire class in it in the geology department, or it's at least an entire chapter in any intro level geology course. Well, politics held that theory back, and it was a good theory. It's explained a lot. It helps us to understand so much, but it was held back by stodgy old professors who had something to lose if their theories were overturned. So let's be careful with theories. An excellent YouTube video, it's a TED Talk. I'm trying to remember the guy's name, but it's called The Science Delusion. Maybe I'll link it here. Otherwise, take a look at it if this sort of thing interests you. Also, theories are problematic. Every theory can be challenged. There's pros and cons on both sides. There's arguments for and against this thing that you're theorizing being true. And what we have to do is, hopefully, through empirical research methods and statistical analysis, or sometimes just through really good, well-respected methods of qualitative analysis, especially when we talk about people, which we do a lot in communication, we try to make a strong case that this theory is dependable. It is useful for us today. It's the best truth we have to work with today, and if you follow it, you won't go too wrong. So that's why we deal with theories. Each one of these perspectives now we're discussing here is really a theory. Okay, I've got a little formatting problem. We'll just roll with this. So these perspectives, classical management approaches. Classical management. This is the early theory of how you need to structure an organization. It developed out of military and governmental organizations that were very hierarchical. And there's a division of labor. I've got the well-oiled machine here, producing a bottle of wine. There's efficiency. We're after efficiency here. Probably, I look kind of at an earlier history of this when I think of classical management. The Civil War in the 1860s, 2 militaries, North and South, needed to be efficient. And if you read about military history, or if you run a business, you know that logistics, getting your stuff where you need it, when you need it, for the people to use, is just critical. And this has to be a smooth operation. Well, they came up with a very systematic approach for doing this. Didn't always work in World War II, but they began making progress. And even most of the guys I've talked to throughout my work career that have served in the military, I'm probably not many women served in the military back in the 60s and 70s, people I've known. Many of them were in logistics. One of my good friends worked on an aircraft carrier putting bombs on the planes that flew over Vietnam every day. He didn't go out and fight, he was bringing the stuff in, and so many people just worked at a base, moving stuff, getting it where it was needed. Not as many people actually did the actual fighting. A division of labor is just essential here. You people do this, these people do that, and these people do that. You don't cross over, but you've got to have a manager there organizing everything, planning it out, plotting, making sure everything works. It's this well-oiled machine that really goes for production and efficiency and something that works. A very practical approach. This was the early approach. And if you look at the history of American business, after the Civil War, the Industrial Revolution really got underway as things settled down. And guess who were the leaders of all these new corporations that were starting up and doing industrial stuff? Well, they were the college-educated people, and also the college-educated people served as officers in the military, by and large, during the Civil War. Even after World War I, we still had this division of labor in this country where people who were college-educated became officers in the military and then went into business at higher levels and leadership levels based on their military experience. Well, what kind of organizations do you think they structured? Something very like what they were most familiar with. Here's your orders, you follow them to the letter. If you don't, you're you're fired. Don't shoot people anymore who don't follow orders at work. But that was their mentality. The next generation came along and bang, there's World War II, World War I, World War II right after this. And so this approach, the military and the leadership skills that people developed in the military had a heavy influence on this approach. But as things settled down in between the wars, we still had, okay, let me go ahead one slide, and I still have some formatting problems here, don't I? We still had some problems here. Not some problems, what worked into this was this idea of scientific management came in. And it wasn't just somebody with a little military experience or a lot who was designing how our system is going to work for our organization. They made a science of it and even studied it in the universities. Classical management, a researcher, Fayol, a theorist came along, plan, organize, command, coordinate, control, all of these aspects. And it went just from this is the way we did it in the military. Well, they knew they weren't in the military. They were in something else, trying to make a profit, trying to make things work. But they still had that underlying approach to leadership, and now scientific management was coming in and refining that and doing its best to focus on the problem at hand and create that well-oiled machine. That's, I think, my favorite metaphor. Let's move on to our next slide here. There's the well-oiled machine. And here was the problem with this approach. People got ground up in the gears, so to speak. And the response to that, by the late 1890s, when organizations and the Industrial Revolution and big companies creating and making all this stuff, were labor unions to fight back. Because people were getting ground up in the gears, they were getting used up, they were getting injured, and then just, you broke your leg, if you lost a foot, can't use you anymore, you're out of here. And the people themselves started pushing back against this heartless machine. And it's not hard to run a heartless machine as a CEO, as a manager, when you were a captain in the military and gave people orders to march into fire, and half of them didn't make it back. Well, that's also what they brought along with classical management. I think a lot of that is fading out of the approach, but that was the foundation of it early on. Unions fought back, pushed back. Take care of this guy here. Of course, he's a comedian from an old film. But the point is realized here. These workers had dangerous jobs, and so OSHA was born at some point. We've got to take care of people. And what happened was, in this evolutionary process, the pushback led to the human relations approach. And that's our second big structural way of organizing something. Human relations, we are going to look out for people. We're going to pay them enough to live on. We're going to try to make sure they don't get hurt. Yes, there are some jobs that are just dangerous, and people do get hurt, but let's take care of them. Let's take care of their families if they are killed at work. And valuing the people, not just as the little cannon fodder, that's that term, just send 20,000 people out there to charge that line, and 19,000 are going to be killed by the cannon fire. But we take care of people to some degree, and we begin to take care of them, and they will work harder. Now, this was initiated I'm still talking the evolutionary aspects here. Let's stop for a moment. The classical approach clearly uses information transfer. That's right out of the military. Or this strategic control method of communication, persuading people to go do their best work, to work hard, whatever it is. But these are the two preferred methods of communication models in the classical management approach. As we get deeper into this human relations approach, this was actually, the scientists got involved pretty quickly here, and to make that well-oiled machine, they did this experiment, the Hawthorne experiments, where they started adjusting the lighting in the factories to see if brighter lights or lower lights help people be more productive. You know, going for 2% more productive makes a difference. And what they found instead was when people felt they were being watched, they were more productive than when they knew they weren't being watched. And that was the Hawthorne effect. They found a difference in changing the lighting conditions, but it was due to the researchers being there watching. And this kind of led to a realization that we've got human beings here that are working, and this human relations approach needs to recognize that and value that. It wasn't just the unions fighting back and these picket lines of people with axe handles and even guns, even killing one another, that forced the hand of classical managers. It was a recognition that we can get more productivity if we treat people well. You recognize that organizations are really cooperative organisms here. We have to cooperate, and we do better when we cooperate, and when people want to do a good job and will work hard for us, we make more profit. And organizations, businesses are inherently practical when it comes to profit, especially those that rely on profit rather than a nonprofit or a governmental organization. The humans relations approach obviously began to bring in this more transactional process of communication. You have to listen to people to know what they want so that you can keep them happier as employees. And the communication models here also began to develop out of our own discipline, and pointing out to people it's not just giving orders and memos and employee manuals. You talk to people, you listen to people, you understand, you empathize. Yes, there's still an aspect of classical management, but it is beginning to shift into the human relations era. We always will have a well-oiled machine in good organizations, but how human is it? Does it grind people up, or does it treat people like humans? The next change in this evolution came along. We call it the human resources approach. Kind of took off in the 1950s. Abraham Maslow, you recognize him from your Psych 101 courses, and the hierarchy of needs. What is it that people need at work? And let's focus on their needs. And what this approach recognized is that humans are resources, they're assets. People are your assets. They're not just hands doing the work in your assembly line. There's something more valuable than that, and we need to recognize it as an asset and value it and do our best to develop it. And so there's more of a focus on individual needs, and recognize that people like to work. They want to feel useful. They want to be committed to an organization. They want the security that comes from fitting in well and being a part of something, and leading to this esteem and self-actualization, those higher levels in Maslow's pyramid there. And organizations really did begin to realize this. And so this classically managed, well-oiled machine that started becoming more sympathetic and keeping people from dying at work and paying them a living wage started to realize that, hey, there's even more here than we thought. Let's value these people. Let's have employee training programs. Let's reward people that get a college degree. Let's even pay for their college. And we began a new approach to, not a new approach, remember these are evolving. We're getting layer upon layer in the organizational structure, from just taking care of people to actually valuing them. A friend of ours in Albuquerque worked at a very interesting business insurance company. They had about a 6-story building there off the freeway where she worked. And the top floor of that building, it was shaped like a giant ship. I don't know if you've ever seen it there along I-25. And the top floor had almost an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And they had workout rooms and showers, and it was just dedicated to go up at your lunch hour and work out and get away from the office 2 floors down, to get your exercise in after work, before work, just really taking care of the people beyond just paying them a living wage and having a safe environment. And so all of this started to happen. Now, all the while this is going on, you still have organizations like I worked for in the 1970s and 80s, the Bechtel Corporation down near Buckeye, Arizona, where they had the nuclear power plant, the Palo Verde job going. And I worked there for several years. I was exposed to asbestos. I was under conditions that were too loud for working. My ears still ring all the time probably from that plant, and just too much noise all the time from machinery. Hey, they took chest x-rays of me at one point. But they didn't tell me I was working with asbestos in the wiring. I think we knew it was there, but they never told us it was a danger, and they were starting to figure that out back then. Fortunately, I've had no respiratory problems my whole life. But, and maybe that's because I worked in clean rooms for the next 5 years after that and got my lungs totally cleared up. And I remember the doctor looking at my lungs about 1984 and saying, "You've got a lot of dust in your lungs." And I could see it on the x-ray myself. And some years later, about 1990, going back and having another chest x-ray, and your lungs are as clear, they're good, you're good to go. And all the dust was out, that's from the clean rooms. So, they weren't necessarily just taking care of people and looking out for best interests. And corporations still regularly have scandals about employees working with dangerous chemicals, or OSHA procedures being violated and somebody getting hurt because of that, and then the cover-ups. We still have the classical management underneath there giving ground to OSHA and unions and governmental regulations about workplace safety, not quite going human resources on you. I've never had an employer that paid for my college, but some of you have and are now. At the same time, recognizing people do like to work. Let's take care of people. And remember, your managers are people. They just answer to somebody higher up. Hopefully it's not policy behind them driving everything, with upper level CEOs still looking at it like a well-oiled machine. All right, finally, this is where chapter 3 ends. I'm going to back up. This transactional process still is probably what's going on here. This strategic control communication model is still in operation in many organizations, just an extension of information transfer, even though they're kind of taking care of you now, or maybe even paying for your training classes and making you a better employee to benefit them, to benefit you. Works both ways. We still have these older communication models, not always transactional, yet even in strategic control, they're recognizing we've got to have some transaction, we've got to have back and forth in the communication. So chapter 3 ends right about here. Chapter 4, they've broken out. The old chapter 3 went right on into systems theory in the prior edition of the book. The current edition you have, the light blue one. If you've got the red edition, chapter 4 and 3 are together. They've expanded chapter 4. We'll talk more about it in our next lecture, but I just want to take a preview of it here. It's this systems perspective of organizations. This is the fourth way organizations can structure themselves. And it's a system, and it's a metaphor of a living organism in one sense. I kind of like I'll skip ahead one slide here, the mobile, hanging from one single string, and you have all the balance points and the other parts hanging, and it's perfectly balanced. Systems are like that. They're open typically. They're in an environment. We recognize the wind can blow and move the mobile around. Your employer is a system in an environment, and economic things happen. People lose their jobs somewhere else. They don't have enough money to buy your products, and it affects your business. New inventions are made that affect your business for better or worse. If you don't change, it's going to be for worse. Systems are open, and they can grow. Open meaning they're not closed, they're not just inside the room, but the outside affects them. That's part of the environment. There's interdependence among the units in your organization. They need each other, and they need to understand that they need each other. the systems perspective begins to take all this into account. There are goals for the entire organization, hopefully the goals of each unit aim towards those goals. We'll look at that more in a later chapter. There are processes that happen. It's not just the product moves down the assembly line, but especially in the information age, when people and information are a big part of business today, these processes and feedback loops are just really essential. Openness, yet order at the same time, is just a hallmark of systems. This is the kind of structure that business schools today are teaching and want organizations to begin to adopt and shift out of the classical management, retain the value on people. Of course, remember, this is evolutionary, and the old is never extinct. It's still there, and even in a systems managed organization, something like Google or Amazon, I've heard really good things about these employers. Even within those environments where creativity is valued in communication, they do have rules, and underneath at some point there's still a well-oiled machine that's working to produce the product. There are rules to be followed, and the classical management never totally disappears. It gets downplayed, but I think people understand we have to have order and a system and networks, and that's just how it works. But how do we implement it, and do we best manage our human assets by taking care of them and helping them grow and become better employees? Yet there's still a lot of organizations that say they do all that, but still treat you like crap and put incompetent people into management because they're promoting friends, and you've seen the worst of it. You'll be telling your stories in our discussions. The systems perspective is kind of an ideal. In the 1990s, as I went through graduate school, finished up in 2000, this is what we talked a lot about in my organizational communication classes that I took in Memphis. And systems theory, this is the future, and these companies that are run like a system, just how much profit they were making. And then the dot-com bubble burst, and the reality of hard economic times always seems to bring back classical management: make a profit, get efficient, trim back, oil this machine, get rid of these programs and processes, we can't afford them. And hopefully the systems perspective works its way back in as companies do better financially. Governments tend to be very classically managed in the way they do business, yet some began to value people and aim more towards being a system, but it's much harder for them to change, it seems. So the systems perspective still hasn't been fully realized in this ideal world we hope for. We have all these other structural models for organizations all blended together, working at the same time, yet each organization you work for, you may analyze, one of these models will tend to dominate. The others are kind of layered in on top of that. And that's what you want to be able to look at and see as an employee, as a manager, as somebody starting your own organization. What's going to dominate the organization, and what kind of communication model are you going to bring in to make everything work as best as you believe it can work? Or, and frankly, you can get a thin slice of an organization in an interview, and you can recognize their model and their communication patterns right away within a single 30-minute interview, and you can probably make a decision whether you want to work there or not. I decided to leave one organization and come to NAU, and I was convinced by the interview and the thin slices I got here that it was a better situation for me. Upon my arrival, I was confirmed it was a better situation, much more open transactional communication going on, not nearly as much of the strategic ambiguity or the unethical persuasion going on here. Yet at the same time, the grass isn't greener all the time, yet it was here. And with changes in leadership and time, things can change, and who knows what the future will bring. Organizations really are a system, even when they're tried to run like machines. And it's good for you, someone getting a college degree going into management, to keep that close to your mind, that this is a living organization, system, machine thing that changes with response to systems and the environment and the economy and the attitudes of people. And we have to be flexible, but at the same time, efficiency, the well-oiled machine view that is so effective for making a profit anywhere, for getting your product out the door on time and keeping customers happy, that we can never lose sight of all of that. Okay, read these chapters 3 and 4, and we'll continue on about chapter 4 in the next lecture, and they are essential to you writing a good solid essay number 1 for this class. And if you can grasp these things we've been talking about, chapter 2 and 3, the communication models and patterns, the organizational structures we use, and recognize it's been an evolutionary process. It's been a process of improving, responding to challenges, and theoretically grasp these. And this whole business of organizational communication just begins to open up for you. You understand your employers. You know if you want to keep working somewhere, if you need to get out of there. These ideas will help you confirm such things, even what you've always suspected. You've seen all this in operation your whole life, through school, through work, even within a family, and you'll recognize these patterns of structure and of communication, and you know whether you like them or not. You may see them in yourself and may decide to change how you manage, how you run your family even. So this is very practical material. Grasp it, show me that you've got it in essay number 1, and we'll move on to some other peripheral aspects of organizations as we go through the rest of the course. All right, have a great day. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.